Kethavar had served in the Galactic Defense Coalition for 12 cycles, and in all that time, he had never seen anything like the human ships that dropped out of hyperspace above Zerion Prime. The sleek vessels moved with an elegance that seemed almost organic, their hulls gleaming like polished bone in the pale light of the system's twin suns. "Coalition forces, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the UES Defiance," came the transmission. The voice was calm, professional, with just a hint of something that made Kethavar's secondary hearts skip a beat. "We're here to assist with the Vorthak incursion." Kethavar adjusted his position at the tactical station aboard the Coalition cruiser Steadfast Resolve. His forearms moved across the control surfaces with practiced efficiency, pulling up the tactical display. The Vorthak fleet was massive, 300 ships of various classes, all bristling with the dark energy weapons that had made them the terror of 6 sectors. "Humans," muttered Commander Zeftai from the captain's chair, his reptilian features twisted in what passed for a frown among his species. "I thought they were just a rumor." The tactical display updated as the human ships took formation. There were only 12 of them against the Vorthak horde, but something about their positioning made Kethavar's fur stand on end. They weren't forming a defensive screen like any sane species would do. Instead, they were arranging themselves in what looked like an attack formation. "Sir," Kethavar called out, his voice cracking slightly. "The humans they're moving toward the Vorthak fleet." Commander Zeftai's head snapped around. "Impossible. Even humans can't be that foolish." But the display didn't lie. The 12 human ships were accelerating directly at the Vorthak formation, their engines burning bright blue against the black of space. As they moved, something changed about their ships. Panels slid back to reveal weapons systems that didn't appear on any Coalition database. "Coalition vessels," Captain Chen's voice came again, still maddeningly calm. "Recommend you maintain position and provide fire support. We'll handle the initial engagement." "Handle the initial engagement?" Commander Zeftai sputtered. "There are 300 enemy vessels." "Understood, Coalition Command. ETA to engagement range, 30 seconds. Kethavar watched in fascination as the human ships suddenly broke formation. What had appeared to be a simple charge transformed into something far more complex. The vessels split into 3 groups, each taking a different vector toward the Vorthak fleet. Their movements were so precise, so coordinated, that it looked like a dance. The Vorthak had noticed the humans now. The dark energy cannons on their ships began to swivel toward the incoming threats, charging with ominous purple light. Kethavar had seen those weapons tear through Coalition shields like paper. He found himself holding his breath. 20 seconds. The human ship suddenly changed course again, executing turns that should have liquefied any organic crew inside. Kethavar's instruments registered acceleration forces that would have killed him instantly, yet the human vessels continued their deadly ballet without missing a beat. 10 seconds. The Vorthak opened fire. Purple energy beams lanced out across space, enough firepower to vaporize a small moon. Kethavar expected to see the human ships torn apart, reduced to glowing debris in seconds. Instead, the humans simply weren't there anymore. The 12 ships had scattered like leaves in a storm, each one following a flight path that seemed to defy physics. They rolled and twisted through the deadly energy beams with impossible precision, never staying in one place long enough for the Vorthak targeting systems to lock on. "How are they moving like that?" whispered Navigation Officer Rilsa, her tentacles writhing in agitation. Kethavar was wondering the same thing when the humans finally returned fire. The weapons that emerged from the human ships didn't look like anything in the Coalition arsenal. Instead of the standard plasma bolts or particle beams, streams of what looked like liquid light poured from their weapons. Where these streams touched Vorthak vessels, armor simply ceased to exist. Not melted, not vaporized, gone, as if it had never been there at all. But it was what happened next that made Kethvar truly understand why the humans had earned their reputation. The lead human ship, the Defiance, suddenly accelerated directly toward the largest Vorthak battlecruiser. The enemy vessel was 3 times its size, armed with enough weaponry to level a city. Any sane captain would have tried to maintain distance, using speed and maneuverability to stay alive. Captain Chen apparently had a different plan. The Defiance flew straight at the battlecruiser's main guns, weaving between energy blasts that came close enough to cook its hull. At the last possible second, when collision seemed inevitable, the human ship rolled to one side and fired every weapon it had directly into the Vorthak vessel's primary reactor. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away. "Impossible," Commander Zeftai breathed. "No one flies like that. No one." But the humans were just getting started. With their largest opponent eliminated, they turned their attention to the rest of the Vorthak fleet. What followed wasn't so much a battle as a demonstration of why some species were meant to be predators and others were meant to be prey. The human ships moved through the enemy formation like sharks in a school of fish. They struck from impossible angles, appeared where they couldn't be, and vanished before retaliation was possible. Their weapons carved through Vorthak armor as if it were made of paper, while their pilots performed maneuvers that should have been physically impossible. Kethvar watched one human fighter, a single pilot craft no larger than a coalition shuttle, take on 6 Vorthak destroyers simultaneously. The pilot spun and twisted between their attacks, returning fire with weapons that seemed to bend space itself. When the engagement was over, all 6 destroyers were nothing but expanding clouds of superheated gas, while the human fighter didn't have so much as a scratch on its hull. "Sir," Kethvar's voice was barely a whisper, "I'm reading massive casualties in the Vorthak fleet. They've lost over 100 ships in the last 5 minutes." Commander Zeftai's scales had gone pale. "And the humans?" Kethvar checked his instruments twice before responding. "No casualties, sir. Not even minor damage to any of their vessels." On the main screen, the battle continued to rage. The Vorthak were trying everything they could think of: concentrated fire, ramming attacks, even self-destructing their ships in the hope of taking a human vessel with them. Nothing worked. The humans simply moved too fast, hit too hard, and seemed to know exactly what their enemies were going to do before they did it. "Coalition vessels," Captain Chen's voice came over the comm again. She still sounded perfectly calm, as if she were discussing the weather rather than orchestrating the systematic destruction of one of the galaxy's most feared fleets. "We're going to need you to handle cleanup and rescue operations. This should be wrapped up in about 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Kethvar looked at his instruments again. The Vorthak had started this battle with 300 ships. Now they had less than 50, and that number was dropping by the second. "Commander," called out the communications officer, her voice shaking, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Coalition High Command." "Put it through," Zeftai managed. The image that appeared on the main screen was Admiral Thexron, the Coalition's supreme military commander. His normally composed expression was one of complete shock. "Commander Zeftai, what in the name of the ancestors is happening in your sector?" "The humans, sir. They're destroying the entire Vorthak fleet." There was a long pause. "How many human vessels are engaged?" 12, sir." Another pause. Longer this time. 12 ships against 300 Vorthak vessels?" "Yes, sir." "And, sir?" Zeftai swallowed hard. "They haven't taken a single casualty." Admiral Thexaran's expression went from shock to something approaching terror. "Commander, I want you to record everything. Everything. The Coalition needs to understand exactly what we're dealing with here." As if summoned by the Admiral's words, the tactical display updated with a new contact. Another human ship was dropping out of hyperspace, this one even larger than the Defiance. The newcomer took position behind the human formation and began deploying what looked like boarding pods. "Coalition forces," came a new voice, younger than Captain Chen's but carrying the same unsettling calm. "This is Commander Marcus Webb aboard the UES Retribution. We'll be conducting prisoner rescue operations on the remaining Vorthak vessels. Recommend you maintain safe distance." Kethvar's instruments detected the launch of dozens of small craft from the human ships. They streaked toward the crippled Vorthak vessels like bullets, too fast for point defense systems to track. Within minutes, they had docked with every surviving enemy ship. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "I'm detecting weapons fire inside the Vorthak vessels. Small arms, not ship-to-ship weapons." Commander Zeftai turned to Kethvar. "How many troops did they deploy?" Kethvar ran the calculations. "Based on the size of the boarding craft, maybe 200 soldiers total, sir." 200 soldiers to board and secure 50 enemy ships? The commander's voice was barely a whisper. The weapons fire from inside the Vorthak vessels lasted exactly 6 minutes and 37 seconds. Then the human soldiers began reporting in, their voices as calm and professional as their ship captains. "Retribution! This is boarding team Alpha. Vessel secured. 47 prisoners rescued. 38 enemy KIA. Retribution, boarding team Beta. All compartments clear. 62 prisoners liberated. Enemy resistance eliminated." The reports continued in the same vein. Each team had secured their assigned vessel with minimal time and effort, rescued whatever prisoners the Vorthak had taken, and eliminated all opposition. In less than 10 minutes, 50 heavily defended enemy ships had been completely neutralized by what amounted to a small raiding party. Kethvar found himself staring at the tactical display in disbelief. Where moments before there had been a massive Vorthak fleet threatening to devastate Xerion Prime, now there was nothing but debris and captured vessels. And the humans were already forming up to depart, as if this had been nothing more than a routine patrol. "Coalition Command," Captain Chen's voice came over the comm one final time. "Area secured. Prisoners and refugees are being transferred to your vessels for processing. We're needed elsewhere." "Wait!" Commander Zeftai called out desperately. "Captain Chen, we need to debrief, coordinate, understand." But the human ships were already accelerating away from Xerion Prime, their engines leaving trails of blue fire against the stars. Within moments, they had vanished into hyperspace, leaving behind only the wreckage of what had once been the most feared fleet in this sector of the galaxy. In the sudden silence that followed, Kethvar became aware that his hands were shaking. Around the bridge, his crewmates stared at their instruments with expressions of profound shock. They had just witnessed something that challenged everything they thought they knew about warfare, about courage, about what was possible. "Sir," the communications officer whispered, "Admiral Thexeron is requesting an immediate report." Commander Zeftai nodded slowly, still staring at the empty space where the human fleet had been. "Tell the Admiral that we've just encountered humanity's military forces for the first time." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "And tell him that we need to reconsider everything we thought we knew about this species." As Kethvar began compiling his sensor logs for transmission to Coalition High Command, one thought kept echoing through his mind. The humans had fought that battle not with the desperate fury of cornered animals, but with the cold efficiency of apex predators. They hadn't been trying to survive, they had been hunting. And for the first time in his life, Kethvar truly understood what it meant to be prey. 3 weeks after the Xerion Prime incident, Kethvar found himself stationed aboard the Coalition Fortress, Eternal Vigil, a massive defensive platform guarding the approach to the galactic core worlds. The posting had been intended as a promotion, a reward for his exemplary service during the Vorthak crisis. Instead, it felt like exile. The nightmares had started immediately after the battle. Kethvar would wake in his quarters, fur matted with sweat, reliving those moments when the human ships had moved like living things through space, the way they had carved through the Vorthak fleet without hesitation, without mercy, without even apparent effort. The complete silence from their crews during the most intense moments of combat, as if what they were doing required no more concentration than breathing. But it was the reports that had truly shaken him. Admiral Thexron had ordered a complete investigation into human military capabilities following the Zerion Prime engagement. The findings had been classified at the highest levels, but Kethvar's security clearance gave him access to the preliminary data. What he read challenged everything the Coalition thought it knew about warfare. The human ships that had destroyed the Vorthak fleet weren't even frontline military vessels. According to Intelligence Division, they were classified as patrol ships, essentially the human equivalent of police cruisers. The weapons they had used were considered standard defensive armaments by human standards. Most disturbing of all, the engagement at Zerion Prime was recorded in human military archives as a minor skirmish with hostile aliens. Minor skirmish. 300 of the galaxy's most feared warships had been destroyed or captured, and the humans considered it barely worth mentioning in their reports. Kethvar, report to the command center immediately. The announcement over the station's comm system jerked him back to the present. He gathered his equipment and made his way through eternal vigils, massive corridors, noting the increased activity among the crew. Emergency lights were flashing in some sections, and he could see security teams moving toward defensive positions. The command center was in chaos when he arrived. Admiral Mortex, the station commander, was standing before the main tactical display with an expression of barely controlled panic. The display showed a massive fleet formation approaching from the outer rim, easily 1,000 ships, all broadcasting Vorthak identification codes. Kethvar, the Admiral called out as soon as he spotted him. Thank the ancestors you're here. We need someone with experience fighting alongside humans. Sir? Kethvar moved closer to the display, his secondary hearts already beginning to race. The Vorthak are calling this the Revenge Fleet, Admiral Mortex explained. Every ship they could gather from across their empire, all converging on Coalition space. Intelligence estimates they've assembled the largest single military force in recorded galactic history. Kethvar studied the formation. The ships were arranged in perfect attack order, their dark energy signatures painting ominous purple highlights across the tactical display. At the center of the formation was something that made his blood run cold, a Vorthak Devastator-class dreadnought, a vessel so massive it could crack planets. What's their target, sir? Earth. The single word hit Kethvar like a physical blow. The humans' homeworld. The place where their species had first learned to reach for the stars. They want revenge for Zerion Prime, Admiral Mortex continued. Complete extermination of human space, starting with their capital world. Our long-range sensors indicate they'll reach the Sol system in 6 hours. Sir, have we warned the humans? The Admiral's expression grew even more grim. We've been trying to reach their military command for the past 2 hours. No response. Our scouts report that human space appears to be quiet. No unusual military activity, no emergency mobilization, nothing. Kethvar felt a chill run down his spine. Either the humans didn't know what was coming, or they simply didn't care. Given what he had witnessed at Zerion Prime, he wasn't sure which possibility was more terrifying. Admiral, called out the communications officer. Priority transmission from Coalition High Command. Put it through. The main screen shifted to show Grand Admiral Yelshan, the supreme military commander of the Coalition Defense Forces. His usually composed demeanor was cracked by obvious fear. Mortex, status report. Sir, the Vorthak Revenge Fleet is 6 hours from Sol system. We've lost contact with human military command. Understood. I'm ordering you to take the 7th Fleet and intercept the Vorthak force before they reach Earth. Admiral Mortex's mandibles clicked nervously. Sir, the 7th Fleet consists of 42 ships. The Vorthak force numbers over 1,000. I'm aware of the odds, Admiral, but we cannot allow them to reach human space. If the Vorthak succeed in destroying Earth, it will embolden every hostile species in the galaxy. The coalition will appear weak, unable to protect even our newest allies. Kethvar found himself speaking without thinking. Sir, with respect, what if the humans don't need our protection? Both admirals turned to look at him. Grand Admiral Yelshan's expression was unreadable. Explain yourself, tactical officer. At Zerion Prime, 12 human patrol ships destroyed 300 Vorthak vessels without taking a single casualty. What if they're not mobilizing because they don't consider this a significant threat? The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Grand Admiral Yelshan spoke. Officer Kethvar, regardless of human military capabilities, we have a duty to our alliance. The 7th Fleet will intercept the Vorthak force and provide whatever assistance we can. Is that understood? Yes, sir. 3 hours later, Kethvar found himself back at a tactical station, this time aboard the Coalition battlecruiser, Final Stand. Admiral Mortex had brought the 7th Fleet out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, directly in the path of the approaching Vorthak armada. The tactical display was overwhelming. The Vorthak Revenge Fleet spread across space like a plague, their ships arranged in perfect attack formations. The Devastator-class dreadnought at their center was larger than some Coalition space stations, its hull bristling with enough weaponry to sterilize entire worlds. Contact the lead Vorthak vessel, Admiral Mortex ordered. Within moments, the main screen filled with the image of a Vorthak war leader, his chitinous features twisted with rage and bloodlust. Coalition fools, the alien snarled. You will witness the destruction of the human pest species, and then you will join them in death. War leader Gaxmore, Admiral Mortex replied with admirable calm. The Sol system is under Coalition protection. Turn your fleet around and we can discuss terms. The Vorthak's laugh was like grinding glass. Terms? There are no terms. Today, humanity dies, and with them dies the illusion of Coalition strength. Prepare to... The transmission cut off abruptly, not from the Coalition end, from the Vorthak side. Across the enemy formation, ships were suddenly changing course, their sensors apparently detecting something that had escaped Coalition notice. Sir, the sensor operator called out. I'm detecting new contacts. Single ship, approaching from the direction of Earth. The tactical display updated. A lone vessel was accelerating out from the inner system, its signature unlike anything in the Coalition database. As it approached, more details became clear. The ship was sleek and predatory, like the vessels Kethvar remembered from Zerion Prime, but larger, much larger. Coalition Fleet, came a transmission from the approaching vessel. The voice was calm, professional, with just a hint of something that made Kethvar's fur stand on end. This is Admiral Sarah Chen aboard the UES Nemesis. Thank you for your offer of assistance, but we have this situation under control. Admiral Mortex stared at the display. Admiral Chen, our sensors indicate over 1,000 enemy vessels. Your ship appears to be alone. Not quite alone, Admiral. And we're not just one ship. As if summoned by her words, space around the human vessel began to shimmer. Dozens, then hundreds of ships began decloaking around the Nemesis. They appeared from empty space like ghosts materializing in the physical world, their hulls dark and angular, designed for war. But it was what happened next that made Kethvar truly understand the difference between human and Coalition military thinking. The human fleet didn't form a defensive line. They didn't take positions to protect Earth or guard the shipping lanes. Instead, they accelerated directly at the Vorthak armada, moving with the coordinated precision of a hunting pack. All ships, Admiral Chen's voice carried across the communication channels. "Operation Thunderbolt is authorized. Show them why we don't negotiate with terrorists." The Vorthak fleet began firing before the humans had even reached maximum weapon range. Purple energy beams lanced across space by the thousands, enough firepower to slag a moon. The humans simply weren't there anymore. What followed wasn't a battle, it was an execution. The human ships moved through the Vorthak formation like predators through a herd of prey animals. Their weapons didn't just destroy enemy vessels, they erased them from existence. Where Vorthak ships had been, there was suddenly nothing but expanding clouds of elementary particles. "Impossible," Admiral Mortex breathed. "No species fights like this. No one." But Kethvar was beginning to understand. The humans weren't fighting like any known species because they weren't like any known species. They were apex predators from a death world, evolved from creatures that had hunted mammoth-sized prey with nothing but primitive tools and unconquerable will. War wasn't something they had learned, it was something they were. The Nemesis itself was heading straight for the Devastator-class dreadnought, weaving between weapons that could have destroyed any coalition ship with a single hit. As Kethvar watched, the human flagship fired a single projectile at the massive Vorthak vessel. The projectile struck the dreadnought's primary reactor and simply kept going. It passed through the ship's armor, through its internal structure, through its opposite hull, as if the massive vessel were made of paper. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the dreadnought came apart at the molecular level, its atoms suddenly forgetting how to hold together. "Sir," the communications officer called out, his voice shaking, "the Vorthak fleet is attempting to retreat." On the tactical display, the surviving Vorthak ships were indeed trying to escape, burning their engines at maximum power as they attempted to reach hyperspace jump range. The humans pursued them with the patience of natural hunters, picking off stragglers with methodical precision. "Coalition vessels," Admiral Chen's voice came again. "We appreciate your willingness to assist, but as you can see, the situation is well in hand. We'll have this cleaned up shortly." Admiral Mortex found his voice. "Admiral Chen, that was... impressive doesn't begin to cover it. How did you know they were coming?" There was a pause before the human admiral responded. "Officer Kethvar aboard your vessel filed a very detailed report about Vorthak capabilities and behavior patterns following the Zerion Prime engagement. Our intelligence division found it quite useful in predicting their likely response to that defeat." Kethvar felt every eye on the bridge turned toward him. His report? He had simply documented what he had observed, noting the Vorthak tendency toward revenge attacks when they suffered significant losses. "Based on Kethvar's analysis," Admiral Chen continued, "we calculated a 93% probability that they would attempt a massive retaliation strike against Earth within 30 standard days. We've been ready for them since the day after Zerion Prime." Ready. They had been ready for over 1,000 enemy vessels, with what appeared to be a few hundred ships of their own. And they had just proven that it was more than enough. The battle was over in less than 20 minutes. When the weapons fell silent, there was no trace of the Vorthak revenge fleet save for expanding clouds of debris and a handful of escape pods that the humans were already collecting. "Coalition Command." Admiral Chen's voice was as calm as if she were reporting the completion of a routine patrol. "Area secured. No human casualties. We're uploading tactical data for your analysis." As the human fleet began to disperse, returning to whatever hidden bases they had emerged from, Kethvar stared at the tactical display and tried to process what he had just witnessed. The coalition had been preparing to make a heroic last stand against impossible odds, and the humans had treated the entire affair as a minor training exercise. "Kethvar," Admiral Mortex called softly, "prepare a full report on this engagement, and this time make sure you include your assessment of human military doctrine." As Kethvar began documenting the battle, one thought kept echoing through his mind. The coalition had spent centuries developing defensive strategies, building fortifications, creating protocols for survival against superior forces. The humans had spent their entire evolutionary history learning how to be the superior force. And now, for the first time since joining the coalition, Kethvar was grateful to be on their side. 6 months had passed since the destruction of the Vorthak revenge fleet, and Kethvar had been reassigned to coalition intelligence as a specialist in human military affairs. It was a position that existed because of his reports, though he sometimes wondered if he truly understood the species he was supposed to analyze. The briefing room aboard Coalition Headquarters Station was unusually crowded for a morning intelligence meeting. Representatives from 12 different species sat around the polished conference table, all of them wearing expressions of barely concealed anxiety. At the head of the table, Grand Admiral Yelshan looked as though he hadn't slept in days. "Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings," the Admiral began, "we have a situation that requires immediate attention. 3 days ago, the research station Deep Thought went dark in the Kepler 442 system." Kethvar pulled up the relevant files on his personal display. Deep Thought was a joint coalition research facility, home to some of the galaxy's most brilliant scientific minds. Over 2,000 researchers from 40 different species worked there, developing everything from improved FTL drives to new medical technologies. Initial investigation suggested equipment failure, Admiral Yelshan continued, but yesterday we received this transmission. The room's main screen activated, showing grainy footage from what appeared to be the station's central laboratory. Alien figures moved through the corridors, tall, skeletal beings in dark armor that seemed to absorb light. Kethvar had never seen their species before, but something about them made his secondary hearts race with primal fear. "The Devourers," whispered Ambassador Trillax, her crystalline form flickering with distress colors. "They're supposed to be extinct." Admiral Yelshan nodded grimly. "That's what we thought. According to historical records, the Devourer Empire collapsed over 5,000 years ago after they strip-mined their way across 3 entire galactic arms. Apparently, some of them survived in dark space." The footage continued, showing the alien figures herding coalition researchers into containment areas. The scientists weren't being killed. They were being cataloged, sorted like specimens in a laboratory. "What do they want?" asked General Mordak, his warrior species' natural aggression barely contained. "Based on intercepted communications, they're interested in our research, specifically our work on consciousness transfer technology. They believe they can use our scientists' knowledge to achieve true immortality." The room fell silent. Consciousness transfer was still theoretical for most species, a dream of transcending physical death that had inspired philosophers and scientists for millennia. If the Devourers had mastered it— "Sir," Kethvar spoke up, "what's our response plan?" Admiral Yelshan's expression grew even more grim. "That's the problem. The Devourers have surrounded the station with a fleet of vessels using technology we don't understand. Their ships appear to be partially composed of dark matter, making them nearly impossible to target with conventional weapons. Any direct assault would likely result in the deaths of all hostages." "What about the humans?" The question came from Ambassador Kelran, whose aquatic species had developed a healthy respect for human military capabilities since the Vorthak incidents. "Have they offered assistance?" "We haven't contacted them yet," Admiral Yelshan admitted. "The situation is delicate. The Devourers have made it clear that any aggressive action will result in the immediate execution of all research personnel. We're still exploring diplomatic options." Kethvar felt a chill run down his spine. He had seen what happened when the coalition tried to solve military problems through diplomacy, while humans solved them through action. The results were rarely favorable for coalition forces. "Sir," he said carefully, Perhaps it would be wise to at least inform the humans of the situation, as a courtesy to our allies. Before the Admiral could respond, the briefing room's emergency communicator activated. Priority transmission from the UES Intrepid. Admiral Marcus Webb requesting immediate conference with Coalition High Command. A collective shiver ran through the assembled beings. Admiral Webb was the human officer who had led the boarding operations against the Vorthak fleet at Xarion Prime. His reputation had spread throughout Coalition space in the months since. "Put him through," Admiral Yelshan ordered. The main screen shifted to show a human male in his 40s, his face bearing the kind of scars that spoke of extensive combat experience. When he spoke, his voice carried the same unsettling calm that Kethvar had learned to associate with human military personnel. "Admiral Yelshan, we're aware of the situation at Deep Thought. We'd like to offer our assistance." The Coalition Admiral blinked in surprise. "Admiral Webb, we appreciate the offer, but this is a delicate situation. The hostages are being held by a species that views other life forms as raw materials," Webb interrupted. "Admiral, with respect, the Devourers don't negotiate. They consume. The only language they understand is force. But they've threatened to kill the hostages if we attempt any aggressive action." Webb's expression didn't change. "They're going to kill the hostages anyway, Admiral. That's what Devourers do. The only question is whether we save some of them or lose them all." Kethvar found himself leaning forward. "Admiral Webb, what do you propose?" The human officer's attention shifted to him. "Officer Kethvar, I've read your reports on human coalition military cooperation. Excellent work." "Thank you, sir." "We propose a joint operation. Coalition forces provide distraction and sensor support while human special operations teams board the station and extract the hostages." Ambassador Trillax's crystalline form flickered anxiously. "Admiral Webb, the Devourer ships are protected by dark matter shielding. Our weapons can't penetrate their defenses. Ours can." The simple statement hung in the air like a challenge to the fundamental laws of physics. Dark matter was virtually impossible to interact with using conventional technology. Even the most advanced Coalition weapons simply passed through it harmlessly. "How?" Admiral Yelshan asked. Webb's smile was predatory. "That's classified, Admiral, but I can tell you that we've been developing countermeasures against dark matter technology since we first encountered it in the Horsehead Nebula. The Devourers aren't the only species to experiment with exotic matter weapons." Kethvar felt his pulse quicken. The humans had encountered the Devourers before, and not only survived, but developed weapons specifically designed to fight them? "What do you need from us?" Admiral Yelshan asked. "Just stay out of our way," Webb replied, "and be ready to provide medical assistance to the survivors. We'll handle the rest." 2 hours later, Kethvar found himself aboard the Coalition command ship, Strategic Wisdom, watching as the human task force dropped out of hyperspace near the Deep Thought station. The human fleet was smaller than he had expected, only 6 ships, led by Admiral Webb's flagship, Intrepid. But as the vessels moved into formation, Kethvar noticed something that made his fur stand on end. The human ships were different from the ones he had seen at Xarion Prime and Sol. These vessels seemed to bend light around them, their hulls appearing to shift and flow like liquid shadow. Whatever technology they were using, it was beyond anything in Coalition databases. "Coalition Command," Admiral Webb's voice came over the communication channel, "initiating Operation Shadow Strike. Recommend you maintain position and monitor for survivors." On the tactical display, the Devourer fleet surrounding Deep Thought began to respond to the human presence. Their dark matter shielding activated, turning their ships into barely visible distortions in space. Energy weapons of unknown design began charging, painting the darkness with malevolent purple light. The humans attacked without warning. One moment the Devourer ships were preparing their weapons. The next, they were being torn apart by forces that shouldn't exist. The human vessels fired streams of what looked like concentrated nothingness, beams of pure void that carved through dark matter shielding as